My name is Colin, and nobody asked me to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Welcome everybody to the very first episode of Nobody Asked Colin. This is going to be a show where I just get some thoughts off my mind, whether they be relevant to the news or just whatever I'm thinking about. You know, it's hard to believe, but it's been about 6 months since Square Enix announced they'd be remaking Final Fantasy VII for the current generation of hardware. Honestly, I couldn't believe it. For years, Square Enix has denied the possibility of remaking that game specifically because it would require so many resources. And yet they're doing just that, and the internet went predictably insane with videos of people crying at a trailer. Oh my god, Final Fantasy VII! Oh, I was born in 2001, why do I even care about Final Fantasy VII? Then again, I actually stood up and screamed when they announced Shenmue 3, so I guess I shouldn't be judging. Anyway, as soon as they announced this, there were a number of people on the internet creating caveats for if and when they would play the game. If it's not turn-based, I'm not playing it! If they don't include all the mini-games from the Golden Saucer, this game is a complete failure. I'm not gonna play this until you release Kingdom Hearts 3. But the strange thing is, despite all of this, people were still excited. Keep in mind, Final Fantasy VII is the most popular, mainstream JRPG ever released. Look guys, nobody cares about Dragon Quest in the West. I'm sorry, I really like the series, what are you gonna do? Yeah, there's some pretty slow parts in the game, and yes, it is overrated, but you can't deny that game is recognizable in 2015. So the internet was once again set ablaze when they revealed gameplay for Final Fantasy VII Remake at the PlayStation Experience last weekend. Long story short, it basically looks like Final Fantasy 15. Which isn't really a bad thing because they just released the PC version of Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 4, so if you want your turn-based RPG, you can go get it. But before people could fully digest this new concept for this classic game, there was more news. Square Enix announced late Sunday night that Final Fantasy VII Remake will be a multi-part series. Now, this totally could mean that they're making a bunch of different Final Fantasy games just like they did back in 2004. But the stronger possibility is that it's going to be episodic. The best thing about this news is that nobody expected this. This was never on anyone's list of do's and don'ts. Except mine. So I think it was around 2 years ago, I was looking to get into Persona. I went to a couple of different message boards to ask exactly where I should start. It was a big mistake. You gotta start with Persona 1. No, you gotta play Part 3 and Part 4. You'd better play FES. You'd better play Golden. You better play the originals. And the funny thing is, the more I began to dig into it, the less enticed I was to actually play any of the games. Yes, they're still in the backlog. I will get around to them one day. But I really started thinking about how JRPGs are maybe the most inaccessible games on the planet. Sure, there's Dota, and yeah, there's EVE Online, but those games are actually popular. JRPGs have waned over the past decade. Of course, there are still a few people out there, like me and you, that still play JRPGs every year. But the vast majority of people that own consoles or play on PC, A, never got into them, or B, stopped playing them. And there's actually a lot of reasons for this that you can point to. Obviously, JRPGs are incredibly long, they can be sort of obtuse, and sometimes the cultural translation doesn't always work. But the one I kept coming back to was length. JRPGs are still amazing, but their length is really discouraging. Most people don't even finish the Call of Duty campaign that only takes around 6 hours. How do you expect them to sit down for 60? Funny thing is, there was another genre that had the exact same problem. The adventure game. Adventure games had their glory days in the 1990s. People were obsessed with them. Maniac Mansion, The Dig, there were so many great adventure games. But by the early 2000s, that genre was dead. So what happened? Well, Telltale. Don't get me wrong, episodic games have existed before. I mean, look at Shareware. But Telltale's The Walking Dead changed everything. You could finally play an adventure game for 3 hours and not put it down because you were frustrated or tired or bored, but because you were done with that episode and enticed to experience the next one. It created a conversation. People were now talking about adventure games, what they experienced, swapping ideas, and it could be a part of it because it was so easy to complete. And that is exactly where JRPGs need to go. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all JRPGs should become episodic. There are certainly games out there like Xenoblade Chronicles X that should be 100 hours long and you should play as much as you want. But for many, Final Fantasy VII is the flag bearer of JRPGs internationally, and Final Fantasy VII is the biggest of the bunch. In a lot of ways, this remake is actually bigger than Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy VII is a classic, one that is revered, but how many people actually bothered to even beat it? Heck, they just re-released on the PlayStation 4. How many people do you think are actually going to beat that game for the first time? My guess? Not many. So how do you engage a mainstream audience back into JRPGs? You make it shorter. Can you make Final Fantasy VII a shorter experience? Yes. Will it lose a lot of its meaning? Absolutely. The thing about Final Fantasy VII, as well as a lot of other Final Fantasies, is that it's really segmented into different adventures. You've got the early sections in Midgar, you've got the sections in the bathhouse, you've got the Golden Saucer, you've got your first encounter with Sephiroth, you've got this amazing cerebral experience with Cloud that I won't spoil in case you've never played the game before. Perhaps more so than any other Final Fantasy VII fits into these nice little chapters. This was a game where Squaresoft threw everything at the wall and didn't care if it stuck. Can you imagine a chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake ending as soon as you leave Midgar? Suddenly, it takes something old and creates this new anticipation. Now, I know what you're saying. We already know the story of Final Fantasy VII, so isn't that kind of pointless? No, because we have no idea what it's going to look like. Can you imagine getting hyped to meet Cat Sith? Because let me tell you, if they start off a chapter with Cat Sith, it's going to be exciting. And then we get to have the conversation. Anyone familiar with JRPGs is familiar with those other JRPG fans that just finish those games in a weekend. Does some of you people do that? Do you just not sleep? How on earth do you do that? But we live in a world where most people that play video games have jobs or school or families or cats. That's exactly who Square Enix need to go after. Suddenly, it only takes you 7 hours to be part of a JRPG. To be part of the conversation on the internet or at school or at work. Hey Ted, did you get to that snowboarding part yet? It's pretty good. And the best part is, this could eliminate grinding. And before you freak out, grinding isn't essential to a JRPG. Best example is Fire Emblem Awakening on the 3DS. It was an RPG that relied on strategy instead of time commitment. Suddenly the idea of fighting that desert weapon doesn't sound so terrible. Now there are a few caveats to this idea, at least for me. Number 1, make the price reasonable. This should all add up to be about $60. Sound fair? Sounds fair to me. Number 2, leave as much of the story intact as possible. I want to go to that bathhouse and get scrubbed down. Number 3, keep the releases consistent. Waiting month after month after month for the next episode of an adventure game without even a release date is painful and kills the story. Number 4, when it's all said and done, release it on a disc. I know Katase said they couldn't possibly do that. That's fine. When all the development's done, just release it, man. Number 5, give Tifa a sword. And lastly, keep those side quests in there to reward the players that want a little something extra to do while they're waiting for the next chapter. And make the game good, obviously. That's important. And there you have it. Final Fantasy VII Remake as an episodic title could totally work. Most importantly, it could return the JRPG back into the mainstream. Once again, I'm not saying all JRPGs have to be mainstream, but it's important to have different tiers. You know, like back in the 90s, you got your Final Fantasies right here, and then you got your Xenogears somewhere around here, and then you got your Wild Arms down here. And suddenly, more people will start playing, talking, and thinking about Japanese games. And that's always a good thing. Well, that's going to do it for the very first episode of Nobody Asked Colin. Remember to leave your comments below. I read them all. I'll try to reply to as many as I can, and maybe I'll make a video from the replies. I want to thank everybody for watching. Now, if you don't mind, I need to cross-dress my way into a sauna. I'll see you soon.